Hey everyone, welcome to Admit One with G Money. Today we have a very special episode. It is the 1-year anniversary of the podcast. In September of 2021, I started live on Twitter Spaces under the cutting edge with guests like Gary Vee, Nadia from Pussy Riot, and Don Diablo. As the G Money community advanced and the NFT space grew, I felt like the podcast should evolve with it. We introduced Admit One in May and have had guests from Timbaland to Seth Green to Bored Elon. So I couldn't think of a better way to kick off the next year of the show other than some of Web3's most influential and thoughtful leaders. I'd like to welcome Avery Akkineni of Vayner3, Derek Edwards of Collab Currency, and Matt Medved of NFTNow. Hey everyone, thanks for coming on and thanks for taking the time.
Great to be here.
I guess we'll go around the horn real quickly. I'd say maybe quick 60-second, 2-minute introductions for those who don't know who you guys are. Would love to kind of get the audience so that they understand that, that we are actually talking to some of, I think, the best and brightest minds in Web3. So Avery, how about we start with you?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me. And thanks everybody for tuning in. I'm Avery and I run Vayner3. And Vayner3 is a Web3 consultancy focused on helping enterprises figure out what's happening in this wonderful world. We too launched just over a year ago in June of 2021 as Vayner NFT shortly after VeeFriends. And I have the pleasure of helping sort of enterprises navigate this space.
Awesome. And Matt with NFTNow?
Hi, I'm Matt Medved, co-founder and CEO of NFTNow, premier publication for NFT coverage and curation. Prior to that, I founded Billboard's dance electronic music brand back in 2015, ran Spin Magazine as editor-in-chief, and then ran content at Modern Luxury, the lifestyle publisher. Bought my first Bitcoin in 2013, became really focused on the intersection of music and blockchain between 2016 and 2018, and then Blau pulled me down the NFT rabbit hole in 2020, and here I am.
Amazing. And Derek?
Yeah, my name's Derek. I'm a partner. I run a fund called Collab Currency. We invest at the intersection of Web3 and consumer. We're early investors in things like Super Rare and Art Blocks and Axie Infinity and Bright Moments, Async, things like this. I'm also one of the early founding members of Flamingo DAO, along with a number of other investment DAOs in the space like Noise DAO and Neon DAO and Red DAO and things like that. And then also a large NFT collector and a friend of G's.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I see you're wearing a Bright Moments hoodie right there, right now, right? Are those crypto Venetians?
I am.
Nice.
Yeah, well, these are all different types of crypto citizens.
Oh, okay, cool. Are you going down to Mexico to mint?
I am going to Mexico City to mint. I'm very excited for the next Bright Moments locale. Doing a back-to-back trip, first in Marfa for the Art Blocks weekend, and then straight to Mexico City to hang out with some of the Bright Moments folks, and hopefully, crossing fingers, mint the next Snowfro long-form generative piece. So pretty excited about that 2-week period.
Good luck.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Is anybody else? Yeah, good. Best of luck. Is anybody else going to Marfa or either of those events?
I'll be at Marfa as well.
Wanted to. I'll be jealously following along.
All right, cool. Yeah, I'm going to Marfa as well, but I don't think I'm going to be able to make it to Mexico City, so I'll be following along virtually for that. I guess I wanted to start the conversation off with the current state of the market, right? Like I think when NFTs hit the scene last year, right, when they really I think started hitting the cultural zeitgeist, prices exploded. There was a lot of hype. There was a lot of enthusiasm. And I know I experienced this on my end, and I'm sure you guys did too, is like as people were learning about it, whether it's a celebrity or a brand or whatever, there was like a lot of FOMO, right? There was like, hey, how do I get involved in this? We need an NFT strategy like yesterday. We have to drop this tomorrow before like our competition does it. And there was a lot of hype. And now I think like a lot of that hype has died down on the surface, obviously, because there's a bear market in crypto along with like every other asset class on the planet. But I wanted to get a sense as to what you guys were thinking of the market at this point in the cycle. Avery, let's start with you.
I think you chime in from how enterprises are sort of thinking about it. So brands, companies, couldn't agree more. I think since our core business at Vayner is actually an advertising agency where we make like Super Bowl commercials and Snapchat ads and all different things like that. So like that's, where a lot of the Vayner fam has kind of grown up. So we've worked with brands on all different things. And in a lot of cases, we were the first people to ever talk to them about an NFT and really explain what was happening. VeeFriends was the first use case where they could really start to understand it just because they know Gary so well. And I do think that created this huge wave of like, my KPI is to launch an NFT by Q4 of 2021. And a lot of like interest and enthusiasm of doing something fast. I think that there's two things happening right now. One, there's a sort of general cool off from companies who were like looking at it from that sort of PR headline, because they realize those headlines can go two ways. It can be great and amazing. And then we've also seen some very negative and polarizing headlines because of, impact of a number of different factors. Second thing that I think is happening is companies are thinking about the Web3 ecosystem more broadly. That was a big trend that we started to notice in early 22 is when we're talking to our partners, it's not like you can just do an NFT if you can't take crypto, if you can't really think about decentralized structure, if you're too afraid to open a Discord. So I think that it's actually a good thing because the companies who are participating now have seen examples of successes and failures, and they can sort of reflect into really building a long-term strategy. So at least what we're seeing at Vayner is a lot of interest, like more dedicated interest, but less sort of, quick activation KPI type thing.
Oh, yeah, I agree with Avery. I think that what we saw during the bull run was, a lot of noise and a lot of people trying to figure out how to capitalize on this, exciting new movement. Now that we're in a bit of a bear market, there's less noise. And I think that's a good thing. People say bear markets are for builders. I think it's really true. I think people can hone in and really focus when that noise kind of dissipates, when all those shiny objects kind of fall by the wayside. And I think from the perspective of brands and the like, there's less of that pressure to enter this now and that short-term mindset that I think could actually be really fatal to a lot of brands who don't navigate it properly. I think brands and actors are now taking their time and really trying to understand this climate, this technology, and the real potential, and actually bringing more of that long-term mindset that I think they're going to need to succeed.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there. I love what Avery and Matt said. I actually have nothing more interesting to say than what they've already covered. The only thing that I'll add is in times like this where it seems like the technology has a little bit less enthusiasm, or we've seen a little bit of retrace in folks that are coming in and rushing through the doors trying to grok and grapple with what's going on here. I think it's always important to remember that this is the first time in human history we've ever been able to have digital objects have digital scarcity and build property rights on top of them. And that fundamental technology isn't going away. And as people continue to stay in the space and experiment in the petri dish around that core primitive, we're going to continue to see like persistent value get created even during times like this where there's macro conditions that are affecting prices of every asset class in the world. So my core belief that this technology is only going to continue to persist and ramp up has never been stronger. It's going to continue to wrap the world's value flows, and so I'm still as excited as I've ever been about Web3 and NFTs and this technology.
Man, I love talking to Derek because every time I talk to him, I get so bullish because you are so clear in your mindset of this is sometimes when I'm like, oh man, I'll get frustrated and I hop on the phone with Derek for 5 minutes. I'm like, yeah, he is right. I'm like, this is the future. So I always love talking to Derek for that reason. Derek, I guess from the investment perspective, from the investment side, what have you been seeing, from, project wise, I know everybody always says, build in a bear. I, launched my admit one in a bear, 90cc in a bear. And, it's interesting, right? Because it's you don't know when things will turn. I think eventually, I think we're all here because we believe in the technology. So we think that there will be, we're at the top of the first inning in terms of adoption. But I guess from an investment perspective, what have you been seeing, and what have I guess some of the projects that have been getting you the most excited?
Yeah, so I'll just say generally speaking, the deals that I see just like people experiment, and I say deals to mean like people that are working on interesting stuff that are looking for capital to continue to form their business. Those haven't really slowed down. Like we're still seeing hundreds of deals a month. We're still seeing really amazing founders leaving Web2 projects or projects that have done well in the past using traditional Rails come into this space and experiment with the primitives that Web3 offer. And so I don't know if that's a leading indicator or if that's if I can extrapolate like information from that kind of says where I'm at. But the people that are playing with these primitives only continues to get stronger and stronger and more interesting. So that's just the first thing I want to say. I think it reinforces my belief that this technology isn't going away, that people are still finding very creative and useful ways to create value inside of this environment. In terms of like what's getting me excited, I think we reached a point in this last cycle where we kind of sputtered out in terms of like the interesting ways people were using the technology to unlock value. And I think what we came out with was some really interesting use cases around store value assets. So things like on-chain generative art or historic assets like CryptoPunks that are still seeing massive value flows. A CryptoPunk ape yesterday sold for $4 or $5 million. So people are still storing wealth inside of these assets. We also saw a lot of experimentation around capital formation and being able to form communities around like these PFP projects. We saw a lot of interesting stuff around gaming assets. But outside of like some of these early use cases, there wasn't that much sophistication around like how the NFT wrapper could be used past that. So the things I'm most excited about right now are things that are playing with like what is the preferred way to wrap these objects? How can we modify these contracts in order to upgrade them over time or to modify them or to make them more responsive to how people use them? What are the ways we can improve the ways communities form in order to unlock new types of value inside of these environments? So those can span categories like fashion, it can span categories like gaming, it can span categories like IRL, on-chain behaviors that flow back and forth. So those are kind of the things that I think are most interesting right now, but continue to see innovation in all corners of this space.
Right. And to that point, right, like I think one of the things that I find the most exciting is, when I'm looking at these projects and you meet people, that are founders or that are on the founding team, a lot of them are coming from like your traditional Web2 companies, right? Like the Fang companies and stuff like that. And like, I think the really interesting thing is that a lot of these companies, they're very, very focused on UI and UX, right? Because you want to make something as simple as possible for the consumer, because the less steps and the more simple you can make it and the cleaner you can make it, the more likely you are to convert somebody from browsing into buying something and being part of your ecosystem. So when I see a lot of these people coming into the space, to me, it's like, oh, this is amazing, right? Because right now, I feel like we're in the internet like pre 1996, right? Like even before like AOL and CompuServe, right? Where it's like it's just a bad UX. It's a bad, you have to be somewhat of a techie in order to understand how things are going. So I think the fact that we have a lot of these engineers and front end devs that are very interested in the space and are coming in means like that UX problem, it's only a matter of time until it starts to get solved, right? And so it's like the Rails will still stay the same, but ultimately like that front end problem will get solved because you have a lot of really, really smart people working on it. I guess along those lines, like Avery, like what have you seen, I guess, on the agency side in terms of, I think the interesting part is, right, like people are no longer focused on that KPI of like, we just need to drop an NFT like right now. Like what are companies, I think, starting to focus on their end in terms of what they're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's funny. You mentioned Fang employees sort of coming over into this space. I'm actually a former Googler, and the number of colleagues, like ex-colleagues that I see at NFT conferences is crazy. Like, people that I worked with like 10 years ago, like 5 years ago are now like flooding into this space. And I think the same is true for many of those companies. So where I think that it's funny because when I talk to people like you all who are like in this space full-time professionally, or, talk to that like crypto Twitter community, everyone is all like talking about the bear and how everyone's navigating it. If you look in the other direction, that's not what people who are joining this community necessarily see. They actually are like, wow, this is this place where everybody is coming together to build this new thing and build this new internet. And, on a personal note, I live in Miami, and was talking to the mayor yesterday, because, I lived in San Francisco in 2010 when like there was so much like excitement and like everyone focused on sort of that Web2 ecosystem. We're talking about how Miami is, they're moving Silicon Valley to Miami if the mayor gets his way. And there's a lot of that same enthusiasm there of people who are recently relocated to a new city with a passion around this sort of specific subculture. So to me, actually, while I'm certainly aware of the like financial, what's happening in the financial markets, like my day to day is actually way more focused on people who are super pumped about this and who are not looking at it as sort of like purely financial, as a lot of people who've been in this space for a couple of years. So broadly, that's sort of my observation. Is it depends where you look, because companies like, Meta and Google pouring billions of dollars into this is interesting. And at the same time, I think is causing sort of two parallel tracks of innovation. Some sort of like pure Web3 purist, I would say, like, really cool stuff that's happening on chain with major companies like what Christie's announced this week with Manifold, I would say is far more in the direction of purist. And then at the same time, we see, companies like Meta enabling NFTs across their platforms globally, right? Which is way more in the direction of like Web 2.5 or starting to allow a little bit of Web3 into their billions of users. So I think those two things are interesting, and our role as sort of advisors to our partners is to help them decide where the right place for them to play is. And it's going to be a little bit of a spectrum depending on, what the business is and what they're looking to do. But I think it's one of the major misconceptions people have around why enterprises want to play in this space is, to make immediate money. Gee, you know this because you've been in some of this too. Yeah, a little bit, but that's really not the motivator of, I would say, 90% of brands who are in this space. They're really looking at this as a way to, take their brand into the next iteration of consumer behavior, not make like a couple $1,000,000. So I think that we'll continue to see programs that are built around scale versus scarcity coming from these sort of more enterprise level programs enabled by a mix of Web 2 tech and Web 3 tech, and then sometimes a place that's kind of in the middle.
Right. I think that to your point, right? Like I think that from the conversations I'm having with a lot of the brands, and as I'm sure you guys are, almost none of them are focused on being like, oh, like how do we, profit off this, right? Like they're still learning, right? It's still like a learning process, and they're like, all right, well, and now a lot of the conversations I have is like, we're going to reinvest all the proceeds back into the project, right? And it's like, yes, this is exactly what you need to be doing, right? Like you need to be building out that community and understanding that this is like the next iteration of how brands interact with consumers, right? Because like, I think it's really interesting. And I think all these brands are like super, super motivated by the fact that, their Discords, they'll open up a Discord and they'll tweet about it or something, and there'll be like thousands of people, tens of thousands of people that are in there instantaneously. And they're like, wait, like we never get this kind of reaction across any of our socials up until now. And now we have like a dedicated group of people that are rabid ambassadors that are interested enough to put part of their time and their day to take part of this ecosystem. I think it's really, really interesting. But to your point is like, most of the conversations I'm having, nobody's focused on the profit, right? Again, I think they realize that it's super early and that they really just want to get a handle for the ecosystem and really be authentic to who they are. And so like along those lines, Matt, like what have you been seeing on your side? And, I know you guys just announced NFTNow Nucleus at Art Basel. So can you talk about that for a little bit? Tell the audience members what's going on there. And, I guess you've been having a lot of conversations with legacy brands on that side as well. And like, what's that been looking like?
Yeah, no, it's been really exciting. So, just for a little bit of background for those who don't know, last year we partnered NFTNow x Christie's for the Gateway, which was our kind of landmark kind of flagship event during Art Basel Miami. And to symbolize creators taking back the power from the financial system, we took over an abandoned floor of a bank building in Miami, transformed it into a 23,000 square foot audiovisual gallery, had all the top artists coming through, Blau, Zach Bia, and Ray Power performed, People, Fuos, just so many incredible artists. And it was a really special moment. Actually, Ethereum's co-founder, Joe Lubin, was there and spoke too. And afterwards, he told me in his words that it was one of the most significant incursions into the legacy world that he'd seen. And so we knew that we really wanted to build on that foundation for the Gateway. Just taking a step back, the vision for the Gateway comes back from this idea and this feeling I was having, and my co-founders Alejandro and Sam and I were discussing of a long-term future for this space. I'm a big believer that we are all part of the last generations to grow up without digital ownership from day one. Future generations are not going to have the same hangups as we do. They're going to grow up owning things physically. They're going to grow up owning things digitally. They're not going to compare and contrast the two. They're going to appreciate them for their own unique strengths and appeals. And so we're already seeing that, like, Gen Z gets it already better with Roblox and Fortnite and all that. But, like, you know, when we look at the traditional art world, we, you know, there's a lot of confusion and fear and like misunderstanding from that world. I sometimes joke, like, if the only thing I knew about NFTs were what I read in the headlines, I might not like them either, you know? But so the Gateway was about creating this glimpse into this future, this not so distant future, where the traditional art world and NFTs and the digital art world coexist in creative harmony, and about extending that welcoming hand. So it was a really, really special event. Received so much great feedback. But one thing that we really felt was that there's so many incredible projects and partners and friends and creators who are doing amazing things in Web3. And we were like, we really want to bring everyone together. Like Art Basel last year, it was great, but it felt a little fragmented. There were parties all over the place. And so we were like, how can we turn this into a nucleus, so that, you know, that's kind of the theme for this year's Gateway, and create what we're calling like a Web3 metropolis. And so this year it's much bigger. You know, we're partnering with Mana Common. We are taking over 2 city blocks in downtown Miami, 12 buildings, a number of very exciting partners who are very excited to unveil. It's powered by MoonPay, so very, very happy to have their support there. And it's really about creating space for all of these different incredible projects and different creators to be able to kind of create their own portal into that future as well. And so it's been incredibly exciting to build on that, and also bringing in both crypto native and legacy brands into understanding what we're doing. And I think that, you know, I'm a big believer that we are all stronger together. And that by like this space was founded on this foundation of cooperation and community, and that's an ethos that we want to continue to really champion and uphold as we continue to grow and build this sort of like this presence, and continue to establish this gateway to the mainstream market. Because, you know, the mission with NFTNow is empower the creators of culture and help bring NFTs from niche to mainstream. So we're here not to just preach to the choir. We want to help convert the masses, and the gateway is one of our most important properties for doing so.
Yeah, the trailer was great. I retweeted it yesterday, but I'm really excited about it because I do think by getting a bunch of, you know, like I was at Art Basel last year and everything was all over the place. So, and if anybody has not been to Art Basel, it is, I don't think I've ever seen such a clusterfuck anywhere in my entire life in any city. Because like these, you know, you're talking about like what's usually like a 10 or 15 minute drive takes like an hour and a half. So it's pretty insane. So I think the fact that you're able to kind of create this nucleus, right, of all these of Web3 in this one area, where if somebody does have an interest in Web3, much like, you know, if you have an interest in art, right, in contemporary art, you want to be in South Beach, right? You want to be at Art Basel and Scope and all the surrounding art fairs there. Like I think being able to carve out like a niche area that is just focused on Web3, I think is super, super powerful.
Absolutely. And it was also important for us that it be a 5-day event. That way people can go to these other areas as well. It's not like they have to pick their battles and the like too. We'll be there. So, you know, if you want to go check out the art in Art Basel, go do so, you know, and we'll be around in downtown waiting for you.
Perfect. I love that. Avery, does Vayner have anything planned for Art Basel? Or anything you can talk about just yet?
Yeah, we haven't announced it yet, but we are doing something at Art Basel. Last year we did a couple of parties, and similar to what you guys were just saying, it was a kind of a bit of a clusterfuck where we were like going between South Beach and Wynwood, and Gary was spending half the time in a car. So this year we are going to do something which I think will be great. That will be much larger scale, but only one day. So we'll get plenty of time to check out what Matt and the NFT Now guys are doing. And I think so many like projects and groups are doing some really cool events and activations. So as Miami local, I'm really looking forward to it.
Amazing. And what's been, I guess, the reception from the mayor with regards to this? Because I know the mayor's been into crypto, but I guess NFTs in general. Like, what's their thought in his office?
Yeah, for sure. So Francis Suarez is the mayor of Miami. He's amazing. Keith Grossman, who's a huge ambassador for the space, and you all know him very well, pulled us together recently for something. We were chatting a little bit more in depth about sort of the future of Miami and as it relates to Web3. I mean, I think Miami's had some like major wins. I believe 2 days ago, FTX just announced sort of moving their headquarters to Miami, which is a big deal. And there's been like an infusion of capital coming in from sort of some of these Web3 companies, which I think is amazing. On the NFT side, I just wanted to give like a huge shout out to the mayor for like going to all of these small events. Like everybody knows the big stuff, the like going to something for Art Basel or like when there's a celebrity there. But, even there's a local project called the Tuttle Tribe, which is Miami sort of female founded project. And he actually went to the launch of that. Like he is so like truly in the community himself, brings his wife and family along to those. So I think he's a huge ambassador for all things really Web3, whether that's crypto and his enthusiasm for Bitcoin or the NFT communities that are starting to spring up in Miami.
Perfect. I love hearing that. And I think that like that's why I think you've seen a lot of people moving obviously over towards Miami, is because they've been so pro crypto that I think at some point you're going to reach that Schelling point over time where it's going to be I think it's going to become one of the next Silicon Valley startup kind of like oases, especially on the East Coast. I want yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of like Web3 startup space there too, which you guys all know, but that helps sort of breed the culture. And also sometimes they move between different companies, start their own thing. Derek as an investor, I'm sure is hoping there's some unicorns born there. I know I am too.
Yeah, so I guess for there, I want to like shift the conversation a little bit. There's a couple of things that I wanted to touch on, and I know we have like some of the brightest minds in the space here. So I want to talk about this. The first thing I want to talk about is the CcO debate. I know this is something that pops up on Twitter every couple weeks. Derek, I know that you're one of probably the most prolific collectors in the space. And I know you and me, like, will always jam on stuff like this every few weeks. I'd love to know, like, your thoughts on CcO and, owned IP and stuff like that. And your thoughts on that. As we've seen a lot of brands, either, you have Bored Apes that gave people the rights to their stuff. You have Nouns that were CcO from the beginning, and you have Moonbirds, which moved over to CcO after minting, and kind of like the reaction that the community had that I think was a little unfounded personally. But I'd love, from a collector's and investor perspective, I'd love to like kick off the conversation about that.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll try my best to kind of work through the merits of everything. The first thing I'll say is I don't think that there is a single approach that exists. I think these are how creators treat their project is very much like using different tools in the toolkit to achieve different outcomes. Largely, the rights and royalty or the rights and licensing structure for a creator's project can be narrowly scoped to very specific outcomes by how they optimize for using these different tools in the toolkit. So I think all of it should exist, and I think creators should feel free to use whatever they think speaks the best to where the project is going. Now, with that said, I also have a fundamental belief that one of the reasons why Ethereum is such a powerful technology is because it has this incredibly neutral infrastructure that exists beneath it, and anybody can walk up to the Ethereum blockchain and start building cool stuff on top and deploying contracts and permissionlessly do so in any direction that they see fit. And there is a network that can get created when there's a freedom to build on top of something without feeling like that power is going to be taken away from you at some certain point. So the analog that I would draw to CcO is that's conceptually what's going on with CcO projects or projects that decide to move in that direction. they've created this base layer. So in the case of Moonbirds or Xcopy or whoever is employing this tool in the toolkit, and they're saying, listen, this is very much a global technology that runs 24/7, and many of the principles that have seen this thing grow organically and has been emergent has become because people can build on top of this thing in whatever direction they see fit. So that's the analog I would draw, and I would say there's real power to networking your asset in that way, as opposed to tightly restricting it and saying you can use it, but you can only use it for X, Y, Z, or you can only use it to commercialize up to this amount of US dollars, or you can use it, but you have to make sure that you check in with this centralized group before you launch this thing, because we might be launching that same thing and we want to protect our marks or we want to protect our rights to enjoy our exclusive ability to do this thing. So check with us first. I think when you optimize for, protection and exclusivity, you're probably optimizing for value creation at the centralized level, which I think is okay. When you optimize for something like networking your asset, you're optimizing for really emergent stuff getting built on top that may extend the power of the underlying asset in ways that are like previously unimaginable. And so I think the overarching statement I would make is there's lots of different ways to use the tools in the toolkit, and I think creators should use them in ways that they best see fit for where they want to take their project.
Right. And I guess Avery, Avery and Matt, both of you, from the conversations you've been having with the brands, right? I feel like that is something really scary, right? Is like, how is our mark going to be used? What's going to happen with our logo if we open it up, right? Because I do think that we've all seen the power of the meme, right? Where if something gets memed and people can really run with it, it is obviously super powerful. But like, what if a noun ends up in an X-rated video or like whatever, right? Like that's really what these centralized systems are focused on. So like, what has been the reception, I guess, on the brand side? Obviously, I can probably answer that. They're probably skewing very conservative, but do you think maybe that they would be open to doing something along those lines at some point in the future? Or like, what have you had any initial conversations along those lines?
Okay. So I think you're absolutely right, G. I don't think that, using a brand's logo as CCO is probably going to be the true for most publicly traded companies, the vast majority. With that said, there's two things that I think that they can do. One is actually support CCO projects and like give sort of their stamp to some of those things. I think that's amazing. And, we've seen use cases of this. We've been working on something that I think will be really interesting in this. But another example, you mentioned nouns, like we helped, put nouns glasses in a Super Bowl commercial, and then Bud Light get a noun, which like that's something that shows that they're supporting this community, right? Even though they might not be able to make their logo CCO, they can support that community and sort of nod to it. I'd love to see more enterprises, and we touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but celebrities as well, adding credibility to what's happening in the CCO movement. I think that's one way they can really help and start bringing that into the more mainstream culture. I'm a huge fan of the Nouns team, Lil Nouns. They're amazing and a huge pleasure to work with. And then the second thing is, I think that they can empower creators to like have liberties of how they interpret their, logo or their slogan or whatever. That's something that we've been doing in Web 2 world forever, right? Where, you give artists the chance to interpret something. And I'll give the Chicago Bulls a shout out for sort of what they did there, where they're empowering artists to be inspired by maybe what the brand or entity stands for. Even if they can't directly like go CCO, they can support those creators or support those creators in finding ways to collaborate.
Yeah, I think those are excellent points, Avery. One of the reasons why I know we're still early is because so many of the people in these debates tend to view NFTs as a category rather than the medium that they are. And they are a medium that is disrupting every category. I believe is going to disrupt every category in the future, fundamentally change how creators and their communities create and share value together. But what's funny is, obviously we saw digital art and digital collectibles drive a lot of mainstream attention and market volume, but they're just two of so many more use cases. And if you think about it, all of these different categories, whether you look beyond to music, TV, film, literary NFTs, even more mundane uses like, government documents and record keeping, etc. All of these different categories have different creative and consumer priorities. both in the pre-Web3 world and in the Web3 world. And as a result, they're all going to also have different different sort of stakes and interests when it comes to IP, and that's okay. Like, I don't think there's any one size fits all approach, and there shouldn't be. CcO makes a lot of sense for a Web3 native project like Nouns or Cryptodes. I'm huge fans of Punk 4156 and Gremplin and all the incredible builders in that space. Love to see Xcopy go CcO, but that doesn't mean that CcO is the right move for every artist, especially an artist who's just getting started and hasn't reached that level of like cultural cachet that Xcopy has. So, to me, I think it's really up to each individual project and creator to figure out what makes sense for them, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with CcO in a community-based PFP project, but if people bought into it thinking that they were going to have commercial rights, I understand why some might not be happy to see that go away without having a say in it, and that's obviously what happened with Moonbirds. But that's not to say that CcO isn't the right move. I just think it really is up to each of these different creators and communities to decide where their values lie and to have a say in that.
Right. Yeah. No. And thank you for that. I agree with you guys. I think that there's different use cases, right? Like the fact of the matter is we now have all these tools at our disposal, and you can then, as a creator or as a project, you can choose, all right, well, this is the way I want to enact my vision, and this is how I want to build on it, right? And just like I've even tossed out the idea, and I'm not sure, Derek, if I spoke to you about this, is like, like what, like, and I'm sure my lawyers would kill me if I bring up the conversation, is like, what would it be like to CcO like, the G Money logo or the 90cc logo or whatever. I'm not ready to make that decision just yet because I want to see how things play out. But like, to me, it's like, what happens with that network effect when you can allow people to kind of just build and do a really cool, amazing stuff on top of like the original idea, right? And like, yeah, I think the Moonbirds debate is pretty interesting, right? Because they obviously caught a lot of flack for changing the CcO after the mint. And I remember listening to that town hall, and there were people that were like, well, I wanted to build commercial rights, and I had this deal with this brand, and that fell through. And like, I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of brands coming into the space, and to be perfectly honest, like I really agreed with Kevin's point of like, I mean, the asset is so cheap, right? Like, if I was a brand coming into the space, I would just buy a Moonbird, right? Like, I wouldn't license somebody else's Moonbird just because it was a Moonbird, right? Like, it would be, maybe if it was like a significant Moonbird that was like a leader in the community that I'm like, I'm really aligned with this person, then sure, like, let's do a partnership together. But like, and this happened with Bored Apes and Adidas, right? Like, Adidas bought their own Bored Ape, right? Indigo Hertz, and they're building IP around that. They didn't license somebody else's Bored Ape to work with them, right? So it's like, to me, like, I think that whole notion of like, oh, I'm going to buy this asset and then like, deals are just going to come because I own this rare asset. It just fundamentally doesn't make sense. Maybe it made sense like a year and a half ago, right? Like where, there, you had ape follow ape, punk follow punk, and communities have that, right? Where it's like, oh, you have this as your PFP, I will follow you. But I don't think like people are like, oh, I'm going to buy this JPEG, and because I bought this JPEG, people are going to like listen to what I have to say, right? Like, I think ultimately it's about the content that you have to say. Like, I don't think people are following me just because I own a CryptoPunk ape. I think they're following me because the nature of my discussions and the things that I like to talk about, like, oh, that's insightful. I want to follow this person and see what they have to say. So I think it's really interesting. I think people place that misperception, right? And maybe even like place value on that really, really low probability of like getting whatever, a multi-million-dollar deal because you own the commercial rights to something, right? Like, it's really, really most likely not going to happen, but maybe people are just holding out that hope. And I think maybe that could have been what it is. That, Derek, maybe, I know you're very you were close to that situation. If you have like any insight on that or thoughts on that issue specifically.
Yeah, no, I really like what everyone has said on this topic. I love these conversations. I think just to piggyback on what you're describing, G, I think that's right. I'll also say it's not that I also will say, like, let's assume that this idea of a partnership or licensing someone's asset in the future is still a thing. I think what will end up happening is, because the legal layer is very jurisdictionally bound, so we have a set of laws in the US, we have a set of laws in Europe, we have a set of laws in different countries across the world. It's really difficult to shoehorn these different legal layers into a technology that's actually very global. And so we have a digital registry by which to connote property rights. My gut tells me, because it's so awkward that we're contorting these different jurisdictionally bound legal layers into this licensing agreement that could possibly happen. My view is that what will end up happening is brands will opt in for something, what I would describe, this doesn't exist, but I would describe it more like object based licensing. So the fact that G Money owns that ape is interesting to a brand. And instead of engaging in a legal layer, like documenting it on a legal layer in all of these different jurisdictions, what they'll do is they'll prove that they're in some sort of licensing arrangement or relationship with G Money's ape on chain in some way. Maybe they sign a transaction, just like a crude example of what that could look like. And that in and of itself achieves the flex that they're trying to achieve when they're selling whatever product they're trying to sell, whatever they're trying to market, or whatever arrangement they're trying to connote through the partnership. And that object-based licensing is way more elegant and achieves the same outcome for them than any other thing that they could document or paper in the legal layer. So my view is, like, we're headed to a world where, like, all of this stuff is going to exist, but more and more, it's hard for me to believe that these trust minimized ledgers just don't usurp the role of what papering a transaction currently has done for the last few hundred years. I just feel like it's wildly inefficient trying to shoehorn that into this technology.
Right. And I think that's why you've seen kind of like a delay of bringing, the digital world into the physical, is because you do need to like deal with those issues, right? It's like as soon as you make something physical, and I'm seeing this with 90cc, right? It's like there are supply chain constraints, there are, jurisdictions in with regards to taxation and all these things that like we have that framework solved. We don't necessarily have it answered in the NFT space because governments are still trying to figure out what to do with Bitcoin, right? And so here we are a couple iterations later, right? And like it's like, yeah, like we can't expect any form of clarity for at least another 3 to 5 years on NFTs specifically, with regards to different use cases, right? Because a lot of times like, oh well, they're securities. It's like, no, well, if you're gonna say an NFT is a security, then like you're gonna have to start saying like every T-shirt at every store sold in America is also a security, and like you really want to do that, like, because that doesn't make sense, right? And so I agree with you. I think over time we're gonna go more towards that. Code is law, right? And it's like, oh yeah, this is black and white, right? Like this is no room for interpretation here because this is the way it was written, right? And I'm sure we're going to need some sort of like dispute layer, settlement layer, how to figure that out. But I think ultimately we're moving towards like a more on-chain thing that's like, yes, this is what you agreed to. You literally signed the transaction. I think along those lines, I know we're starting to cut back on, come up on time. I want to talk about the creator royalty debate because I think this was really interesting. I think part of what made NFTs so wildly popular was the fact that creators could experience in that upside. And in a bull market, right, everybody was like, yes, like that was the meme, that was the meta where everybody was talking about, yes, creators can experience in that upside. They make something and the value goes up, and they should experience that upside because they created it. And now here we are in a bear market, and it becomes very PvP, right, where everybody is out to kind of protect their bag, and there's, if you're not profiting, people are like, oh well, creators shouldn't get paid, and you have seeing the popping up of some exchanges that either pay no royalties to creators or have the option where you decide how much royalty you get paid to a creator. And I have a very opinionated thought on this, but I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this, before we really go into it. Matt, I'd love to start with you on this because I know you deal with a ton of creators with NFTNow.
Yeah, look, I mean, when we talk about artists specifically, like individual creators and all that, like to me, the creator royalty is just a fundamental right in the space. It's what separates this from traditional systems that have largely been exploitative of artists and the creators of culture. Like we can't go back to the days where you have starving artists selling their pieces cheap, and then their pieces selling for millions later, and them seeing no piece of that. That's just not fair. It's not right. And we're moving on from that antiquated system. The technology allows us to do that, and we as a community need to uphold that as a right. One thing that I think is really interesting, when I first got into the NFT space, I was fascinated by the medium native culture here, and we went really deep into the OG crypto artists. And many of those OG crypto artists who originally established that 10% royalty, for artists, understood that they were going to have to defend it in the future. They understood that marketplaces were going to come, that more institutional players were going to come, and they're going to try to erode what is, I think, one of the most compelling reasons why this space, is empowering to artists in a way that traditional systems have not. So that's like a fight I think the artist community has been ready for, and I think it's one that is worth fighting. That said, I do think that creator royalties as a whole, similar to my point before, all of these different categories and different project types are not created equal. They have different consumer priorities. They have different creative priorities. So are there cases where for a PFP project or a community-based project or another type project, creator royalties may actually hinder the success of that project or the liquidity needed to see that to fruition? I can definitely see those cases and those arguments, and I think that each of those, those creators and those projects have the right to set the royalties at what they like. But I think when it comes down to individual creators, artists, musicians, etc., the creator royalty is something that we need to fight for.
Right. And so I'll pause right there for a second because I want to change like the top. I think pretty much everybody is in agreement that artists should get, the royalty that they set. I think that no matter which side of the debate you fall on, most people agree that, hey, art is its own category. It should have its, let's say, 10% royalty rate. I think where the discussion comes from is from, the 10,000 PFP projects, the projects that have a lot of assets, that have a lot of volume, right? And that's where I think a lot of this debate comes from. So Derek, let's I guess start framing it from that aspect of like these PFP projects, because like I can make the case for both sides, right? Is like okay, fine, we have this meme, people are like free to mint, right? And this is what I did. Admit one, free to mint, but I have a 10% royalty because I made it free to mint, right? Like it's, there was no upfront payment towards me, right? So it's like you have the thing of like, okay, if you're going to say we're going to sell this at a primary sale of whatever, right? Then I collect all the money up front. And if I'm getting little to no royalties on the back end, then like you're just incentivizing cash grabs, right? But then people are saying, oh, well, if there's a higher royalty rate on the back end, then like you're making, it's a tax on people that are trading. But it's like, well, if you experience that upside, that extra bump at the beginning, like at some point, like people don't work for free. Nobody does, right? Like, and obviously people that are buying these things also understand that because they're trying to make a profit off of it or whatever have you. And that's why they're trying to cut out creators from the royalty structure. So like, to me, it's like, well, you can't have your cake and eat it too. And I feel like that's what's happening in the space where people are like, oh yeah, like I did buy this for really cheap. And, I also want to make more money off of it. So I'm just going to cut out what I think is a tax, when it's like, well, that was part of the social contract that you signed implicitly by being part of it. So I kind of want to focus on it from like a larger collection perspective, because I think for the most part, everybody agrees that like if you're an artist and you're making one of ones and you make whatever 20 pieces and that thing goes up over time, hopefully your collector values your work enough that they will give you whatever you say is your royalty rate. But I think it's more focused on maybe like the high volume aspect of it, right? Derek, I'd love to start with you on that.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just start by saying I really like what both of you said, and I agree with largely everything that was discussed already. As it relates to, let's call it like businesses or non-art projects that include royalties, I'm not I my view is there has been so much value created through this programmatic royalty structure that would never have been created if that didn't exist. Um, and without replacing a different business model innovation into that value chain, I feel like not having that business model included as part of how value gets created in the space would take us a step backwards. I'll just like as a very crude example, the fact that Yuga Labs was able to put this royalty structure in place now is allowing them to unlock new categories of value by building the other side, by building, gaming environments, by, starting to interact in more meaningful ways with what this thing that they've built can look like outside of the original art that they created as part of the Bored Ape project. And without replacing some other business model into that, what's going to happen is Web3 probably will just sputter out and not win. And like my view is Web3 should win. Web3 is a much more elegant system. It's transparent. People can opt into supporting whatever they'd like. Just because a creator of a project or a platform creates a royalty doesn't mean that a person doesn't has to interact with that ecosystem or that asset. They have the ability to look at the contract or look at the marketplace and say, I don't think that 7.5% of that 10% is fair. I'd rather support this project. And at the end of the day, I think we should be supportive of however people want to create value in this space. And bypassing creator intent, I think, is taking a step backwards. And I also think not replacing it with a more interesting business model or a business model that's even a tenth as good just takes the whole space backwards and leaves me uncertain about how things can get big in this space if creators of any type of project, platform, collection, anything are able to persist if there's no revenue flow back in terms of the value that they've created on the outset.
Right. Yeah. To me, right. It's just so interesting because you have these basically middlemen, right. That are basically cutting out creators, the people that are creating the value, and they're cutting that out because they want to get market share. And then they're charging their fee as a middleman, as a rent seeker, and being and trying to justify it. Right. To me, it blows my mind that this is even a topic. Right. And that, creators are kind of getting the short end of the stick with this. And to me, it's what the way I see it is you're having people that have this technical advantage because they can code and they can read the smart contracts quickly and easily and spin up something and they use this technical advantage against maybe a team or a creator that is not as technically advanced as they are and are cutting them out because oh yeah, well, okay, you can figure this out and you can brick the NFT or not allow them to be available to get, the utilities or something that get part of it. But oh yeah, you have to hire a dev or you have to spend a lot of manual hours trying to police this. To me, it's I think we're gonna have some sort of suite that comes up that is going to allow a creator to be oh yeah, you traded on this platform that didn't pay a royalty. This NFT is no longer eligible to be part of the community rewards program. I think that something like that is going to allow creators to quickly and easily that aren't technically advanced to fight back. And I think that needs to happen in order to level the playing field a little bit because I think you have people with technical know-how just taking advantage of that.
Yeah, and I'm sure many of you guys saw, but that's actually starting to happen. The creators are fighting back and they are actually blocking certain marketplaces in their contracts. I would love to see that sort of scale out because you're right, not everybody has access to those technical resources and has the know-how to do that. But I think that's also in the creator's control if it's something like a new mint. And I'd love to see, Matt called this out, but creators are aware that people are going to challenge them. We all know private sales happen. That happens every day. But not institutionalizing it, I think, is an important obligation of a lot of the thought leaders of Web3, not institutionalizing a way that artists and creators can be, stripped of the royalty opportunity for what they've been building.
Right. And to that point is in what Derek said earlier, right, is as a consumer, you can choose, you vote with your wallet, right? So it's if you think that a royalty rate is unfair, you just don't buy the project, right? Why do you buy the project and then decide after the fact? It's oh, well, now I think the royalty rate is unfair, but it's you knew what the royalty rate was going in, right? And so, or, hopefully you knew what the royalty rate was going in. I was, you want to make sure that those terms and conditions are laid very clearly up front. And I think, you're going to see that over time where maybe ones that, have less royalty rate get more adoption. So then that leads to the play, to whatever the industry standard becomes. But I think by cutting the creators totally out of it, to me, it's just really, really unfair. And it's very, to Derek's point, is like, we just go back to where we were before, right? We just go back to the world we were in. And that is not like the reason why we're here today talking about NFTs is because so many creators started coming onto this platform to build really cool things that they before like never had the opportunity to do because they could never fund their ideas, right? Because they couldn't sit there. I'm going to use, Justin Aversano for a second here, where, he originally sold, Twin Flames for $1,000 each. And, at now he receives more in a royalty rate from one sale than he did from like, I think it was like a quarter, selling out a quarter of the collection at the beginning. So to me, I think it always like gets me going when I talk about creator royalties, because to me it's really a step backwards if we really start cutting out the people that are creating value for the ecosystem. Before we go, I want to be cognizant of time. Thank you all for coming on. Is there any last thoughts that you guys want to share before we log off?
The only thing I'll add is it's been fun to hang out with Avery and Matt and UG as always. Loved the conversation. It's always fun to get such spirited insights when I'm on my first cup of coffee. So thank you guys for the enjoyable hour, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation with all three of you.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think coming from the media world, I know what gets the headlines. I know that the big sales, I know that these things tend to drive attention. But for those who are listening and are really kind of starting to make their way into the space, I would urge you to look beyond that and just think a lot about some of these more unsung stories. What excites me, what gets me up in the morning, is when I hear about artists being able to make a living off their own creative vision instead of client work, artists quitting their day jobs. It's the more unsung stories of empowerment, poets being able to now build a collector base in the emerging world of literary NFTs. Like, I can go on, but this technology has incredible potential to empower creators, big and small. And I just want us to focus and not only focus on the big one.
Love it. Thank you all so much for a very fun 6 a.m. call. It doesn't even feel like it. Like Derek said, morning power up. And G, thanks for bringing us all together.
Awesome. Thanks for tuning in. I'm going to link all your guys' Twitters in the show notes. So if anybody wants to get more valuable insights from these people, make sure to follow them and keep up to date with everything they're working on. And again, thanks for coming on, guys. I thought this was an amazing conversation, and, excited for everything that everybody's working on and continuing this combo offline. But thanks for hopping on. Love you guys, and I'll see you guys later. All right, bye.